Hi everyone, I'm Stan Mallow. Welcome to Paranormal Yakker. My guest today is Genevieve from Jersey Shore Ghost Tours. While the Jersey Shore is known for its white beaches and being the set for numerous TV shows and movies, it does have a spooky, ghostly side which you'll be learning about from my guest. Genevieve, welcome to Paranormal Yakker.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Your Red Bank Ghost Tour meets in front of New Jersey's most haunted restaurant, that being the Dublin House, home of the most well-known ghost of Red Bank. What, Genevieve, can you tell me about the history of Dublin House, the ghost who haunts it, and in what ways has it made its presence known?
So that's a very big question and a really interesting question, I think, and a nice place to start because the Dublin House is probably one of the most haunted restaurants in New Jersey for a variety of reasons. It has an extensive history. It was originally built in 1839. The first location where it was built on, it was actually moved across the river, moved to a different location within Red Bank, and then moved two more times before it settled in its final resting place. So somebody cared about that house so much that when they moved, they picked that house up and took it with them. So it has a very long, extensive history of being a private residence. It's been a restaurant. It's been several different shops and office spaces. And most recently, it is home to the Dublin House, which is an Irish pub. And it's a fantastic place to go eat if you're ever in Red Bank, but they don't pay me to say that. But it is also quite haunted, mostly by the ghost of a woman that they believe is Mrs. Patterson. And she's probably one of the last people to have lived in the house when it was a residence. Mrs. Patterson is quite active in the home, or I should say the pub. It's no longer a home. But she does make it known that she likes her space to be nice and tidy and clean. And one of the most interesting experiences I think that people have had with Mrs. Patterson happens to be in the ladies' restroom on the first floor of the pub. Many years ago, I was doing a ghost tour for an author. She was writing a story about the ghost tour and also having dinner at the haunted location. And it was supposed to be this nice little piece about our tour. And the article ended up being mostly about her experience in the ladies' room at the Dublin House. So she had entered the ladies' room and she heard a woman complaining about how messy everything was in there, how these kids don't take care of anything, and there's stuff all over the floor. And the woman said to her, "You wouldn't do that, would you, dearie?" And she turned to respond to this woman, and she found herself completely alone in the restroom. I think that Mrs. Patterson really likes her house to be maintained well. One of the owners of the hub also shared with me that she likes to organize his desk. She likes to tuck his chair in nice and neat underneath his desk, little things like that. She's an interesting character, I think.
The Count Basie Theater, listed on the National Register of Historic Places in America, is named after the jazz icon, considered one of the greatest band leaders of all time, who was born in Red Bank. The theater, built in the 1920s, is said to be haunted. What ghostly encounters have been reported there?
Oh, so many. A lot of times, what happens on my tours is that people who've actually had the direct experiences join me on the tour so they get to elaborate a little bit more on my original stories. And that's happened quite a few times with the Count Basie. So, our original story had to do with renovations that had been done at the theater and how people were experiencing strange things afterwards, power fluctuations throughout the theater, spaces that they had renovated, updated the electrical work. There should not be these issues going on there. I was telling that story on one of my tours, and there was a gentleman on the tour who shared with me that he worked for one of those stores that sold like the power tools. And repeatedly he had these guys coming in, these contractors coming in, saying that their power tools went completely dead. So week after week, he's exchanging these tools, giving them new batteries. Finally, he's like, all right, either they're scamming me or something's going on. So he asked them all where they had been working, and they were working at the Count Basie Theater. So oftentimes with paranormal activity, batteries get drained, electrical frequencies get messed up. So they think that may be attributed to the activity at the Count Basie. But I've had a lot of other stories about that building itself where people have seen a lady in white in the mezzanine. They've seen the ghost of an usher standing by one of the exit doors. They've actually seen spirits on stage while people were performing. So I don't know what it is about theaters, but they seem to be paranormally active.
Absolutely. I've interviewed a number of people who conduct ghost tours literally throughout the world, and it seems the theaters are invariably the most haunted place there. I guess people in show business, they don't want to leave. They like it. Riverside Gardens Park on the Navasink River is included in your ghost tour of Red Bank. What paranormal or supernatural activity has been attributed to the park?
There's a lot there. There have been quite a few people who have unfortunately died while swimming in the Navasink. The Navasink's a bit of a tricky area to go swimming. The tides affect the river, and you're never quite sure exactly where that current is going to go. In the wintertime, people do ice sail on the river, and they've been doing that for over a century. Oftentimes, people will share with me that they have seen faces in the ice. So that could be some of the ghosts that tend to linger, or it could just be, we like to see faces in strange patterns. But the most, I think, interesting and profound spirit that people have seen is a ghost ship that sails up the Navasink. And it's believed to be the ship of a man named Captain James Cooper, who owned a ship called the Lady's Delight in the 1700s. So he was executed during the time of the Revolutionary War, and it's believed that he still sails up the Navasink and he's still tipping his hat to the ladies along the shore.
I think that's great. Private residential spaces in Red Bank are explored on the tour. Could you, Genevieve, mention a few of them?
So we don't have as many residential spaces on our Red Bank tour as we do on our Keyport tour, but there's been a few. Again, I get a lot of stories as I'm doing the tours. People that generally come on the tour are interested in sharing their own experiences. So I do often get people sharing things like, I grew up over here on Mechanic Street and I had this experience. And the new owners seem to also have that experience as well. So there seems to be a lot of that activity. Red Bank itself is a very old town. There's a lot of very historic, beautiful homes in Red Bank. I think it may have something to do with that. Personally, I believe where there are these stories, that history component of it is so important because it helps to kind of give that story the context that it might need.
In your Keyport Ghost Tour, you take participants on it along Keyport's Waterfront Promenade, which has long had a reputation for being home to the ghosts of pirates and rum runners. What, Genevieve, can you tell me about the ghosts who reside there?
I think, people always ask me, what's your favorite tour to do, Keyport or Red Bank? And it's a really hard question because it's like asking who your favorite child is. But there's so much about Keyport that is so near and dear to my heart. And I think that it's probably because that's where we first started Jersey Shore Ghost Tours, was in Keyport. But the waterfront itself is just a spectacular area. It's constantly populated. There's people there all the time, either fishing or sitting by the water. It's cold out today, but there's still people walking down there. So there's a lot of people around to see the paranormal activity that's happening. Some reports that we've had people see what looks like sailors from a different time period. We've had individuals see actual sea captains. Some have seen pirates, which I'll get into in a moment, and ghost ships. Ghost ships are quite often seen down by the water. I'm not quite sure if it's the actual history and some of the tragic and untimely deaths that people have experienced in that area, or if it's just the water itself that that kind of attracts some paranormal energy. I'm not quite sure. I have lots of thoughts on that, but I'll keep you here all night if I start talking about that. But in particular, we had one of the most bloody acts of piracy that was found on its way to the Keyport Harbor. The bodies of those poor individuals are still in the Keyport Bay. We believe that some of the spirits that people see are them actually walking along the waterfront.
The patriotic themed Old Glory restaurant in Keyport was once a church, and its cellar, from what I was reading, is reputed to be haunted. Could you, Genevieve, relate some of the paranormal activity that has been reported to have taken place there?
Yes, Old Glory is actually, I say they're all my favorite stories, but Old Glory has another special place in my heart too, because it was formerly a church called a restaurant called Trinity. That's when they first started seeing some of the paranormal activity going on. When they renovated the space from a church to a restaurant, some strange things would happen, like faucets would randomly turn on and off, or the ceiling fans would just start turning on. Phone receivers would lift up and drop, and they were kind of just little weird, strange things. Then they actually started seeing the ghost of a little girl. And she was always described as being about 5 or 6 years old. She wore a white dress. She had blonde pigtails. The owner at the time brought in a psychic, and the psychic medium connected with that spirit, found out that her name was Lorraine. They did a few seances. They made contact with her. They've got EVP recordings of her voice. They have EVP recordings of people chanting throughout the building. Orbs upon orbs have been videotaped in this structure. Years go by. Old Glory now takes over the restaurant, and they're continuing to see this little girl. In addition to that, they also see a man who's very tall. He wears all black. He has a nice black hat. I've been told by the bartenders that they saw that ghost of the tall man so often that if a customer walked in and he was tall, wearing all black, they would just not even bother to offer him a drink because they assumed that he was the ghost. So yeah, there's a lot of activity there. I've had a lot of personal experiences with the spirits in Old Glory myself. So again, that's another reason why I think it's so special for me.
Residential homes in Keyport that have a supernatural connection to them are also a part of the tour. And you just mentioned previously that that's the area where a lot of the houses have that supernatural energy. Can you, Genevieve, tell me about the spooky side of some of those homes?
Much like Red Bank, Keyport has an enormous amount of very old, beautiful historic homes. Our Main Street area is where the wealthy people first built their homes in town. And you can see just about every example of Victorian architecture as you walk down Main Street. So it's absolutely lovely. But of course, with that history comes a lot of events that may cause some residual hauntings or some sentient hauntings as well. There's one home in particular that was a very well known speakeasy, and the owner of the speakeasy flaunted the fact that he had never been caught with any illegal alcohol during Prohibition. He had been raided many times. They never came up with any alcohol. So that's a little interesting tidbit of the house. But in more recent years, in the last 30 to 40 years, many people have experienced paranormal activity. Most notably, they see a man who is in a uniform. They often see him appear in children's bedrooms in one of the apartments. The feeling is always that he's there to protect the children. It's a nice kind of energy, I think, to have around. But tenant after tenant has seen and described the same thing. And what I love about my Keyport tours in particular is we often get people independently verifying some of our stories. A few years back, I was doing a tour on Halloween night, and a gentleman approached our tour and asked if he could share one of his experiences. And he starts getting into this whole story about how he lived in a house on Main Street, and every night his girlfriend would see the ghost in the bedroom, and they would always argue because he never saw it. So I asked him what house it was, and he was talking about the same house that's actually on the tour. I just turned to my group and I said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I did not pay him to say that." So we have a lot of that. There's another home that was owned by a doctor in town, a very well-known doctor who actually was one of the founders of our local hospital. It's believed that he still haunts the house that they live in. I've had people on my tour actually see the doctor on the front porch of that house. There's a lot.
Should viewers of Paranormal Yakker want to learn about the tours Jersey Shore Ghost Tours offer, how, Genevieve, can they do that?
We have a website. It's jerseyshoreghosttours.net. We are also pretty active on Instagram and Facebook, and that you can find us on Jersey Shore Ghost Tours for both of those platforms. So those are the best ways. And then send me an email. JerseyShoreGhostTours@gmail is another good way to get in touch.
Genevieve, I thank you for being my guest on Paranormal Yakker. Yakking with you has been a most enjoyable experience. Hi, everyone. This is Stan Mallow, the Paranormal Yakker. I hope you enjoyed the interview you just watched. So that you don't miss any upcoming shows, be sure to subscribe to my free YouTube channel. To do that, just press the subscribe button on your screen.